right, let me hear a couple of the best answers. What is the scariest? An Ewok. Anybody know what an Ewok even is? I had to get the explanation. All right, we know who the nerds are in the room. Awesome. Cool. That's fine. What else? Who else got something? A lamb? Is that what you? Yeah. A spider. Agreed. What else? Bat. A bat. Okay. Mosquito. Agreed. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. All right, so we got some creative things. That's fine. I was thinking like a bed bug, like that would be weird. That would be creepy. Some weird microscopic things. But today, we're talking about the beginning of all things. And as I look at the creation around us, there's part of me that thinks, you know what? It would be crazy if God had decided to make things differently. But we look at the world around us and we say, man, there's something about the world around us that makes us think there's got to be a God. But before we talk about that, I want to talk about how much I love summer. Anybody else love summer? I love summer. I love stepping outside and feeling a wall of hot air just like punishing me. Like I love that feeling. I love the feeling of being able to go outside like yesterday. It's raining outside, you like look contemplative. It's a great experience. I love seeing things grow. It's green. I love seeing green things, new things. What I love about living in this part of the country is that we get to experience all 4 seasons. And what that means is that we're always at the beginning of a new beginning. Have you ever thought about that before? But the seasons are always becoming something. That tomorrow it's going to be more fall than it was today. It's becoming something. The seasons are becoming. I don't know if you know that about you, but you're becoming. That you're going to be different tomorrow than you are today. That you're different today than where you were yesterday. For some of us, that's a good thing. For some of us, maybe not so good. But whatever it means that we're becoming something at some time in some place. And what I love is that when we come together to worship the Lord, that He promises that He'll show up so that tomorrow we actually look more like Him. So that we grow to be more like Him. And really, our mission here at Movement is to lead people to a life-transforming power of Jesus. I want that to be something for you first, that you as a disciple experience Jesus' transforming power in your life so that you're able to live free from unforgiveness, free from bitterness, that you're able to live free from guilt and shame from the past. I want you to experience that first as a disciple. But what we see is that we're not called to just experience that for ourselves, but we're actually called to lead other people to the life-transforming power of Jesus as disciplers. And that means that we have an opportunity in every interaction with the people around us to help lead them to look and live more like Jesus, to lead them to what you've experienced yourself. And so as we're in a season at Movement Church, we've been in different seasons. We've been in a launching season. We've been in an online season. We've been in a home church season. We've been in a movement core season. We've been in a meeting up together season. Anybody tired of seasons yet, right? You're just like, just do the same thing for a while. I want boring life as usual. And for us here at Movement, life as usual is saying every weekend we show up so that we can lead you to experience Jesus in new ways and so that you are able to lead other people to experience Jesus in new ways. And so as we were exploring that idea, of what does it mean in our current cultural context, in our lives, what does it mean for us to be able to understand what it means to be a disciple and a discipler? I had this idea that how many of us know that in order for us to know where we're going, we have to know where we've been? So if I woke up tomorrow, just to prove, some of you are like a little incredulous. You're like, I don't know if I'm believing everything you're saying. If I woke up tomorrow and I forgot everything, if I had amnesia, forgot who I was, I would not know where I'm going. I wouldn't know that I'm a husband who needs to love my wife. I wouldn't know that I have a daughter whose name is Lively. I wouldn't know that I'm a pastor. I would forget the past, and what that means is I wouldn't know where I'm going in the future. The problem is, I think for many of us as Christians, is that we have Christian amnesia, that we've forgotten our story. And because we've forgotten our story, because we don't know our past, we don't know where we're going in the future. And so I thought, what would it look like for us to explore the story of us? That we get to go through the Bible verse by verse from Genesis to Revelation. No, just kidding. I'm not going to do that. That's fine. But we get to explore some of the major themes of the Bible so that we know where we're going. We know where we've been and where God is leading us. And that's the idea behind the story of us. And today we're talking about the story of us, Origins Edition. You ever notice every good story has to have a good origin story? Every superhero has a start. The question is, I think for many of us, that maybe we don't think about it. Maybe you're here today and you're saying, well, listen, I've never thought about why we got here. I just want to kind of pique your curiosity for a moment. So just think about this. The universe right now, so we're sitting on the Earth. The Earth is a part of a galaxy. The galaxy is part of the universe. The universe is 150, how many? 150 billion light years across. 150 billion light years from one side to the other. That's the size of our universe. We're a part of the Milky Way galaxy. There is an estimation that there are over 200 billion galaxies in our universe. Not only that, but there are, I had to look up what this word was. There are estimated 3 sextillion stars in the universe. That's 3 with 23 zeros. I want you to turn to the person next to you and say, you're a miracle. You're a miracle. Here's why you're a miracle. Because here's what's crazy, is that if you unravel all the DNA in your body, and if you were to stretch it out and lay it end to end, it would stretch from here to Pluto, 34 billion miles, and back 6 times. Anybody all of a sudden start to realize, man, what are we doing here? How did this universe get here? How could it be that you're here in this moment? When you start to think about the statistics of whether or not you would make it, like there are a lot of us who, it's a miracle that we're here. And so as we think about this idea of Origins Edition, I want to talk about the beginning. Who are we? How did we get here? What's this all about? I grew up in a 1700s farmhouse in northern Maine. And in the second floor of that house, there was no heat. And so I remember in the wintertime, my teeth chattering with a bunch of blankets on top of me. I would look out, and there was this pine tree that I would look at outside my window at night. I would see it in the moon. It would kind of sway, and I would ask myself these questions. What are we doing? How did we get here? What is this all about? Maybe you're thinking 7-year-old Matt has had more questions than you have. That's okay. That's okay. But I want to talk about that today because I think that every one of us comes to this conversation of origins with some questions. That maybe there are some debates that you've heard or that you've had. And so here's what I want to do. I just want to throw up, as I talk about this idea of origins, what are some of the tensions that you experience? And so let's just kind of write them down on this board over here. And so what are some of the tensions as you think about origins and the Bible that you've heard or that you've experienced? That's actually a question. You got to yell something out. Evolution. Thank you. Yes, evolution. What else? Creation, yeah. There's no tensions. Everybody's like, I've figured this out. I'm so far ahead of you, I don't even know why I showed up today. Yeah, I'll write some down for you. Okay, what about this? What about science versus religion, right? What about faith versus fact? What about 7 days? Anybody? Grow up in a church where 7 days was a thing. They were like, listen, there's only one way to believe, it's 7 days versus 13.5 billion years, right? And so you start to come to this idea of creation and the origin story of the Bible, and all of a sudden there are these tensions that you and I experience that we wonder, am I supposed to listen to the guy on the weekend? Am I supposed to listen to my teacher? Am I supposed to listen to Nova? And what I want to do is I want to talk about what the Bible actually has to say about these things. Because I think it's important, if we don't understand the beginning of how things started, then really we won't understand where we're going. There's some fundamental things like, why does humanity matter? Right? If we're floating through the universe, if it's all of these things where just like, it's just a cosmic accident, why do you matter? If somebody comes up to you and steals your car, why does it matter? It's a bunch of nothing stealing nothing else, right? It doesn't really matter. It's all going to fade. All of this means nothing. We begin to ask questions like this. And what I would like to do today is just kind of give you an idea of what the Bible has to say about creation, about you, and what that has to do with our story. There are 2 words I want us to remember today as we explore this idea. The 2 words are this: God created. The 2 words are what?
God created.
God created. I want to explore those two words. What I want to do is I want to talk about this idea of why do I believe that there is a God? Why do I think there's reason to believe there's a God? Why do I think there's reason to believe that he created us? And if he created us, what does that mean for each one of us sitting in the room today? And so I want to start in the beginning. That's a very good place to start. So Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 opens up with this idea. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So you open up the story of the Bible, and what do you see? You see a God who is outside of the material universe, God outside of time, God outside of space, who brings everything that we see into existence. Now, I know that some of our questions are this, of like faith versus fact, science versus religion, evolution versus creation, 7 days versus 13.5 billion years. And I want to talk about some of those tensions and what the Bible is trying to say and what the Bible is not trying to say. So the first one is this. The first one is everything that you believe with both fact and faith. Let me prove it to you. How is it that you don't think that we're a part of a simulation right now? Right? Because how can you prove whether or not we're part of a simulation? You can't. If we're all a part of the Matrix, there's no way that you can definitively prove whether or not this is the Truman Show. I don't know if anybody ever remembered that before, right? Truman Show? Right? I just had to watch it so I could confirm that's what I was talking about. And so, there's no way to prove that. Now, you have some evidence. You've never seen, a glitch in the system before. You believe that we are all here. There's some facts behind it. But for you to actually live that way, what does it take? It takes faith to actually say, you know what, I can't prove whether or not we're not in a simulation. The existence of other minds. Now, we all live in the world. We take some of this for granted. But the fact that the person next to you actually exists outside of your mind is something you cannot prove. I know some of y'all are like, how do I even know anything anymore, right? You can't prove, look at the person next to you, you can't prove that there is a mind inside of them that exists outside of your mind. Now, there are some facts to believe it. It would be kind of ridiculous if you didn't believe that they actually existed. It would be kind of a ludicrous world, but it takes faith for you to believe that there are other minds in the universe. It takes both fact and faith. And so there were some ideas that I want to just kind of give you for why I believe in the existence of a God. Now, there are many more reasons behind this, but here are just some interesting reasons. The first reason is this argument from the fine-tuning of the universe. So yesterday, I went to Artisan Forge Studios. It's one of the places where a bunch of artists are here in Eau Claire, and I had a great time. And while we were there, we were able to see a number of different people who are creating different things. So there were certain people who had artwork, and so you went in and you saw art, and then you went in and you were able to see somebody blowing glass and somebody making guitars. Now, I want you to imagine that you go in to one of these different stations and you look at the art on the wall, or you look at the guitar on the wall, and you look at it and you're like, man, it's amazing that just popped into existence, right? That's incredible. That just out of nowhere, just boom, showed up, right? The person next to you, first of all, I'd be like, hey, I'm not a huge fan of you. You can probably leave, right? Because they made it. But none of us would say that. Why? Because we look at what's happening in front of us and we can see that there's intelligent design behind it. In the same way, when we look at the universe, what we see are these incredible complexity of the world around us that if it did not end up in just this exact precise way, the universe would not exist. You and I would not exist. And so I wanted to run through some of them together. This is not my ideas. I'm not an astrophysicist. This is actually what astrophysicists have to say. A change and the constant force of gravity, or the weak force, what kind of ties together the nucleus of an atom, is so finely tuned that an alteration in its value by even 1 part out of 10 to the 100th power. What does to the power mean? So what does that mean if you have 10 to the first power? Yeah. So 10 times 10 times 10, 100 times. So it's not like 10 with 100 years. It's times itself for 100 times, right? And so to even 1 part would have prevented a life-permitting universe. A change in the cosmological constant. So what that means is the rate at which the universe is expanding. Anybody know what the universe is expanding? Some of y'all are learning some stuff today. So the universe is expanding, right? And so the rate at which the universe is expanding, if it was changed by as little as 1 part in 10 to the 120th power, would have rendered the universe life-prohibiting. And so I just want to give a picture of what that means. So 10 to the 60th power is like firing a bullet toward the other side of the observable universe, billions of light year away, and nailing a 1-inch target. So to give you a picture of how complex, just to be able to have a life-permitting universe. Now let's talk about some other things. So the fact that like you would have to have inanimate create something that is animate, that's pretty unbelievable. But let's say that it happens. Let's say it pops into, you have all of the what's needed to be able to make something like a cell. And so let's say that happens, then you need to figure out how to make DNA and RNA. Then you need to make sure and figure out how to make it so that not only are there creatures that are like, weird looking and like crawling around on their belly, but then you actually have to make it so that there are sentient beings like you and I who can actually think about something. And not only can we think about something, but we can think about what we're thinking about and think about our thoughts. Pretty unbelievable, right? I've never seen a rock thinking about its thoughts, right? And so what we see is over time, over and over again, you look at the universe, you look at the complexity in you, you look at the fact that there's something rather than nothing, and you start to say, man, it's pretty suspicious to me that it seems like all of this came about for a reason. And so all of a sudden, not you have science versus religion, but you have science that's saying, hey, listen, there's got to be something more that created all of what's around us. Faith has its reasons. Not only that, but I also want to give you a second reason why I believe. And it's this idea, there's a guy whose name is Alvin Plantinga. He's a philosopher. If you're ready, everybody put your thinking caps on here for a second, because the first time I heard this, I was mind blown. So naturalism is the belief that there's nothing outside of the natural world. So everything that you see is everything that there is. So the problem with a belief in naturalism, something that would say that there's not the supernatural, is this idea that if we evolve naturally over time, we evolve for survival, right? That's the idea, is that if you evolve for survival. So that means that if you evolve over time, you don't evolve for truth or for reliable cognition. What that means is that you don't evolve for finding out what is true about the world or right thoughts. You evolve for survival, right? So you don't go to algae in a pond and say, what are the deep truths of life, right? Because why? It evolved for survival. Like, it's just there, and it's not really helping with anything. So the problem is this. The moment that we say that blind evolution just simply happened, what we're saying is that we can't even trust our own thoughts. In which case, I would say, if you can't trust your own thoughts, then I shouldn't trust you on the fact that blind evolution happened. Everybody else tracking with this? And so all of a sudden, we have a self-defeating argument for the very thing that people are beginning to say. So the question is, well, how can then we find out what things are true? And the reason why is because there's a God who created me and you, and he put inside of us the ability to actually find out what is true. First one, fine-tuning. Second one is the understanding that in order for us to have reliable thoughts, it's got to be more than evolution. The last one is this, that everybody in this room has experienced some sort of transformation either in yourself or in somebody around you because of the gospel of Jesus Christ. That I don't know about you, but as I think about this world and as I think about what God has done in my life, I can't help but point and say, well, listen, there's got to be something more, because I know that Jesus has done something in my life that in and of myself I was not able to do. And so there's this transformational experience. There's this longing in our soul for more than what we simply see. C.S. Lewis, one theologian, put it this way. He said, creatures are not born with desires unless satisfaction for those desires exists. A baby feels hunger. Well, there's such a thing as food. A duckling wants to swim. Well, there's such a thing as water. Men feel sexual desire. Well, there's such a thing as sex. If I find myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. If none of my earthly pleasures satisfy it, that does not prove that the universe is a fraud. Probably earthly desires were never meant to satisfy it, but only to arouse it, to suggest the real thing. What he's saying is, listen, every desire that you have has something that will meet that desire. And in every one of us, there's a desire for something more. That says, I long for something more. I long for connectivity with somebody who created me. And that's because God put that inside of you. Ecclesiastes said he has written eternity on every man's heart. And so we begin to look at some of these things and say, well, listen, is it science versus religion? I think it's science and religion. That fact and faith actually help each other understand the world around us better. And so the first part of our story is God. The second part of our story is created. The second part is what? Is created. The second part is created. Here's what it says in chapter 1, verse 26. It says, then God said to them, let us make man in our what? In our image, according to our likeness. They will rule over the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the livestock, the whole earth, and the creatures that crawl on the earth. So God created man in his own image. He created him in the image of God. He created them male and female. God blessed them. God said to them, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. Rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and every creature that crawls on the earth. You see, I think that this really begins to answer a question. And the question, I want you to imagine that maybe 20 years from now, Lively, my daughter, meets somebody, and they ask you this question, what brought you here? Now that question, what brought you here, she could take a few different angles on that. She could be and give the scientific answer. She could say, well, listen, at one point, there was an egg and it was fertilized and 23 chromosomes, and 23 chromosomes became 46 chromosomes, and then those multiplied over time, and then I was born, and she could go through the entire scientific explanation of how she got here. That's entirely credible, right? She could give the poetic explanation of how she got here. She could be like, yeah, I got to tell you this story. There was a boy that came from northern Maine, and there was a girl that came from Michigan. She was way out of his league. There was no way in a million years they were going to get together. But they met, and she forgot the first time they met that he was so forgettable. But he remembered, and he was like, man, that girl is amazing. He started chasing after her. He wrote her love stories and poems, and she broke up with him even, but he kept saying, listen, this thing isn't going to, this is going to happen. And so he kept pursuing her, and one day they got married. And from that's how I came about. That's poetic, right? It's beautiful. She could say, well, listen, I was born here. Now, are any of those things lies? No. The question is, what kind of story does somebody want? What's the question that they're asking? Depending on the question that they're asking is the answer that they get. So I want you to put yourself in the ancient Near East. In the ancient Near East, there are these stories of how the world came about. Most of them actually were coming about through these bloody, crazy wars between these cosmic deities. And so in one case, actually, there's one Tiamat that actually comes down. She gets killed, and literally part of her body gets made to be able to create the earth. Part of her body gets made to create the heavens, right? And so there's a crazy idea of all these wars, and basically we're just kind of like these dirt things that nobody cares about that mean nothing in the universe. And so that's the ancient Near East. And not only that, but there are these kings. These kings are said to be made in the image of God. They declare what is right. They declare what is wrong. And everybody else compared to them is not worth anything. That's why slavery is okay. That's why they can abuse people. It doesn't matter. But in the midst of that context, here's what we begin to see is this idea. How in the beginning, God created. This wasn't a creation out of something that it was death and God just created something out of it. No. God created intentionally us. And not just one of us is made in God's image, but every one of us is made in God's image. So that now as you look around you, regardless of skin color or nationality or age, whatever that might be, regardless of what that person does or looks like, they are made in the image of God. You see, the Bible isn't trying to give us this idea of 7 days or 13.5 billion years. They're not trying to say, listen, here's the 7 days and here's... No. They're answering the question that the ancient Near East had, not the question that 21st century Americans had. Let me tell you why that's beautiful. What that means for the people around us is we live in a world that is desperately hurt and broken, that desperately needs an answer. As we look at racial reconciliation, as we look at racial tensions, as we look at people killing one another over and over on the news, why this matters and the answer that this is the question this is answering is saying, does any of us matter? And the answer that we see in Genesis is yes. Every one of us matters. Because there wasn't one of us made in the image of God. There wasn't one, the president or the king, they're not the one made in the image of God, but collectively we begin to look around at one another and we see the image of God because you're a little bit different than I am. And I love that some of y'all are creative, some of y'all are mechanical. I couldn't fix my car if my life depended on it. I couldn't paint something if my life depended on it. But as I look around, what I see is the Lord in all of us is the image of God. And now we have an answer to the question that has been asked. Does anybody actually matter? Not only that, but we have an answer to a question of, does God actually care about us? That God didn't simply create you. Let's say that we said, yeah, okay, you know what, there's some crazy things, but let's say that God just kind of put things in order and then he kind of takes a step back and just kind of leaves it and you're on your own. But I love that what this narrative answers is nothing, that's not the case, that God wants relationship with you. That God created you for himself. And he finds joy and he finds pleasure and he loves you and he wants relationship with you. What we find in the rest of the story that we're going through is that ultimately every one of us at some point has broken that relationship somehow. There's something called sin. Sin breaks relationship. It does every time. That if you lie to somebody, what does that do? It breaks relationship. If you murder somebody, what does it do? It breaks relationship. In that same way, we broke that relationship with God, but the rest of the story is this idea of God saying, no, I still want to pursue you. I still love you. I want relationship with you. And the rest of the story is a beautiful unfolding of how God pursues each one of us. So as we talk about the story of us, Origins Edition, what I hope that you walk away with is this understanding that there's reason to believe in God. There's reason to believe in faith. And that there's reason to understand that God actually created you on purpose for a purpose, and that we get to live into that new understanding of how God created us. And so there's some steps that I would love for you to take. The first step I would love for you to take is this. The first step is there anybody that I devalue because I think, well, they're not worth that much? Is there a homeless person that maybe you go by at some time and you say, well, man, that person, they have no idea? Is there a neighbor that maybe you've kind of cut out? Is there somebody, a family member, is there somebody of a different skin color that you're saying, listen, I don't know about that person, but God is saying, listen, they're created in my image. The second thing is this. I hope that you search your heart this week to say, man, if God wants relationship with me, if he created me for relationship with him, what does it look like for me to pursue that? What does it look like for that longing that he put inside of my soul to actually become reality, that I actually begin to pursue that and to live into that? And I want to encourage you to keep coming back during this series because we're going to explore what it looks like for you to live into the creative purposes and potential that God put inside of you for relationship with him and relationship with the people around you. Would you pray with me? Lord, we thank you so much for this message. This message that we are not floating in the universe at almost 500,000 miles an hour, rocketing through space for no reason. But that, Father, you created us for a relationship with you. And so, Lord, I pray for every one of us today. I pray, Lord, that we would examine this to see if it's true. That we would come back to your word. Lord, you promise that your word does not return to you void. And so in this moment, Lord, I pray that you would settle in our souls this understanding that yes, there's fact, but yes, there's faith. And faith sometimes requires for me to say, listen, I'm going to believe. Lord, I pray that we would believe today. That we would believe that you are who you say that you are. That we would look at the world around us, that we would look at the other people around us, and that we would see them not as just these accidents, but we would see them as people created in the image of God. I pray, Lord, that we would see ourselves created in the image of God, created for relationship with you, that we would rejoice in that you would bring a song to our soul, that just like one psalmist writes in Psalm chapter 8, he says this, when I observe your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you set in place. What is a human being that you remember him? A son of man that you look after him, but we know that you look after us. Lord, I pray that that joy would set in our heart to know that you've created us for relationship with you, that you pursue us, and that as we say yes to you, that we could experience the joy of the Lord. We thank you for our time together today, and we ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen.